Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but after months of therapy and countless nights replaying that Thursday in my head, I figure maybe putting it out there might help someone else. I was 32, managing a small automotive repair shop in a town where everybody knew everybody. The kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked at night. My wife Amy and I had just bought our first house near the elementary school, and life was moving along exactly as we'd planned it. Quiet, predictable, safe. I'd been pulling 12-hour days trying to get the shop ready for the busy season, and that particular evening in late October, I'd stayed until almost 11 fixing Mrs. Thompson's old Buick because she needed it for her doctor's appointment the next morning. The only gas station open that late was the Shell on Route 47, about 3 miles outside of town, where the street lights ended and the cornfields began. I knew the night clerk, Raymond, a kid fresh out of high school who always had his earbuds in and a Monster energy drink sweating on the counter. My truck's fuel light had been glaring at me for the last 5 miles, and I figured I'd grab a coffee too. Maybe one of those packaged sandwiches that had been sitting there since noon. The parking lot was empty except for a beat-up Chevy Silverado parked crooked near the dumpster, rust eating through the wheel wells and one headlight dimmer than the other. I remember thinking it looked like the kind of truck that belonged to someone who'd given up caring about appearances a long time ago. I pulled up to pump number 2, killed the engine, and stepped out into the kind of cold that makes your nose hair stiffen instantly. The fluorescent lights above the pumps were flickering, creating these weird shadows that danced across the concrete, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear a dog barking, that lonely sound that carries for miles in the countryside. As I was unscrewing my gas cap, I noticed movement near the store entrance. 2 guys I'd never seen before, both wearing dark hoodies pulled up despite being inside. One was tall and lanky, maybe 6'3", with a nervous energy that had him shifting his weight from foot to foot like a boxer warming up. The other was shorter, stockier, with a thick beard that covered most of his face and hands, shoved deep in his pockets. They were standing too close to Raymond, who had backed up against the cigarette display, his usual bored expression replaced with something I recognized immediately as fear. I'd already started pumping gas when I heard the first shout through the glass doors. Not words exactly, just an aggressive bark that made my chest tighten. The taller one had grabbed Raymond by the collar of his uniform shirt, lifting him slightly off his feet, while the bearded one was behind the counter, yanking at the register. I could see Raymond's mouth moving, probably explaining that he couldn't open the safe, that he didn't have the combination, the same thing they train all night clerks to say. My first instinct was to get in my truck and drive away, call 911 from a safe distance, let the cops handle it. But then I saw the tall one pull something from his waistband. Even from 30 feet away, through glass and bad lighting, I knew exactly what that dark metal shape was. And Raymond was just a kid, probably making minimum wage, definitely not getting paid enough to have a gun pointed at his temple. I left the pump running and started walking toward the store, my work boots crunching on the loose gravel, each step feeling heavier than the last. I pulled out my phone, trying to look casual while dialing 911, but my fingers were already numb from the cold and adrenaline, hitting wrong numbers on the screen. The dispatcher answered just as I reached for the door handle, and I managed to whisper the address and "robbery in progress" before sliding the phone into my jacket pocket without hanging up, hoping they'd hear enough to understand the situation. The bell above the door chimed when I walked in, that cheerful electronic ding completely wrong for what was happening, and both men spun toward me. The tall one kept his gun on Raymond but shifted his body to face me, and I could see his eyes now, pale blue, bloodshot, pupils blown wide from what was probably meth or something worse. The bearded one had managed to pry open the register and was stuffing bills into a plastic grocery bag, the kind with smiley faces printed all over it, which would have been funny if I wasn't trying not to vomit from fear. "Just getting coffee," I said, raising my hand slightly, trying to sound like I hadn't noticed anything unusual, like walking into an armed robbery was just another Thursday night inconvenience. The tall one studied me for what felt like hours, but was probably 3 seconds. His jaw working like he was chewing invisible gum, that gun hand trembling just enough to make me worry about an accidental trigger pull. I moved toward the coffee station, keeping my movements slow and predictable, the same way you'd act around an aggressive dog. The bearded one had finished with the register and was now sweeping cigarette cartons into another bag, grunting with effort as he reached for the expensive ones on the top shelf. Raymond was pressed against the wall, his eyes locked on mine, silently begging me to do something or nothing. I couldn't tell which. That's when I noticed the tall one had moved closer to me, close enough that I could smell him, stale sweat, cigarettes, and something chemical that burned my nostrils. "You're that mechanic guy," he said, and my whole body went rigid because being recognized meant this was about to get much worse. "Fixed my cousin's Honda last month, charged him $400 for an alternator." His voice was raspy, like he'd been screaming or smoking for hours, and there was an accusation in it that made no sense given the current situation. I nodded slowly, trying to remember which Honda he was talking about, but my mind was just white noise and the sound of my own heartbeat. The gun was pointing at me now, wavering between my chest and my face like he couldn't decide which would make his point better. Behind him, the bearded one had finished looting and was bouncing on his heels, muttering something about cops and time, but the tall one wasn't listening. He was focused entirely on me, his face twisted into an expression I'd seen before on customers who thought they'd been ripped off, except those customers didn't have loaded weapons and dilated pupils. "That alternator failed already," he continued, stepping closer, the barrel of the gun now maybe 2 feet from my sternum. "My cousin had to miss work, lost his job, lost his apartment. That's on you." The logic was completely insane, but arguing with an armed drug addict about warranty policies seemed like a quick way to end up on the evening news. I started to speak, maybe to apologize or explain, but he cut me off by jabbing the gun forward, not quite touching me but close enough that I could see his finger tightening on the trigger. The bearded one was getting agitated, kept saying a name, sounded like Garrett but might have been Jarrett, and pulling at his partner's sleeve. Raymond had slid down the wall and was sitting on the floor now, his hands over his head like those earthquake drills we did in school. Outside, I could hear my truck still running. The gas pump probably clicked off by now, and I wondered if I'd ever get to finish filling that tank. Everything shifted in a matter of seconds. Sirens in the distance, faint but getting louder, and both men heard them at the same time I did. The bearded one bolted for the door immediately, bags clutched against his chest, knocking over a display of windshield wiper fluid that exploded across the floor in blue chemical puddles. But the tall one, he didn't run. Instead, his face went from angry to something else entirely, something blank and decided, like he'd just solved the equation in his head and didn't like the answer. "You did this," he said to me, and I knew what was coming before his arm extended fully, before his stance widened, before that finger stopped trembling and became steady with purpose. I threw myself sideways toward the chip aisle, but I was 32 with bad knees from high school football, not exactly action movie material. The first shot caught me in the lower back, right above my belt line, spinning me into the metal shelving. The second one hit somewhere near my spine as I was falling, and then I couldn't feel my legs anymore. Just this strange absence where sensation should have been. The linoleum was cold against my cheek, and I could see under the shelves to where Raymond was crawling toward the back exit, leaving handprints in the spreading pool of washer fluid. The tall shooter stood over me for a moment, and I remember thinking he looked confused, like he hadn't expected it to be this easy or this awful. More sirens now, multiple cars from the sound of it, and he finally ran, his boots splashing through the same blue puddles his partner had created. I tried to move, tried to crawl, but below my waist was just nothing, like my body ended at my ribcage. I could taste copper in my mouth and feel something warm spreading under me, soaking through my work shirt, pooling faster than seemed possible. My phone was still in my pocket, the dispatcher probably still on the line, and I wanted to tell them to hurry. But all that came out was this wet, choking sound that didn't seem like it could be coming from me. The cops arrived in what felt like hours but was probably under 2 minutes, their flashlights cutting through the store like lighthouse beams, voices shouting commands at nobody since the shooters were long gone. An officer with a mustache that reminded me of my father's knelt beside me, pressing something against my back while talking into his radio, using codes I didn't understand, but that sounded urgent. Raymond had made it outside and was sitting on the curb, a blanket around his shoulders, pointing toward the highway and trying to describe the Silverado through chattering teeth. The paramedics came next, a blur of navy uniforms and latex gloves, asking me questions I couldn't answer, telling me to stay awake when all I wanted was to close my eyes and make the burning stop. They cut away my clothes right there on the gas station floor, surrounded by spilled chips and energy drinks. And I remember being embarrassed about my old underwear with the worn elastic, which was probably the stupidest thing to think about while bleeding out. One of them, a woman with a septum piercing who looked too young to be saving lives, held my hand while they got me on the backboard, and she kept saying I was doing great, that I was so strong, lies that somehow still helped. The next months were a haze of surgeries, medical terms I couldn't pronounce, and learning that incomplete spinal injury meant I'd probably never walk normally again, if at all. They caught both men 3 days later at a motel 40 miles north. The tall one was named Jerome Bassett. The bearded one was Douglas Kirby, names that became permanent residents in my head. Jerome got 25 to life. Douglas got 15. Numbers that seemed both too much and not enough for what they'd taken from me. Amy had to sell my shop because we needed the money for medical bills and house modifications, ramps, grab bars, a hospital bed that made our bedroom look like a care facility. The town rallied around us, fundraisers at the VFW hall, meal trains that lasted months. But there's a special kind of loneliness in being the guy everyone feels sorry for, in going from fixing cars to barely being able to hold a wrench. I still have dreams where I can run, where my legs work, where I make different choices that night. Maybe I just drive away. Maybe I don't stop for gas at all. Maybe I work 1 hour less on Mrs. Thompson's Buick. But every morning I wake up to the same reality. A wheelchair beside the bed, Amy's forced smile, and the knowledge that one Thursday night at a gas station changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who thought our little town was too small for this kind of violence. Most people join Facebook groups to connect with their community, maybe sell some old furniture or find out about local events. That's all I wanted when I moved to Millbrook 2 years ago. Just a simple way to meet people and feel less alone in a new place. I was 28, had just gotten divorced, and was starting fresh with a job at the local veterinary clinic. The town had maybe 8,000 people, the kind of place where everyone waves at each other but nobody really knows your business unless you tell them. I lived in a small rental house on Oakwood Drive, nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom with a big maple tree in the front yard that turned the most incredible shade of orange every fall. Life was quiet, predictable, exactly what I needed after the chaos of my marriage falling apart. The Facebook group was called Millbrook Community Board and had about 3,000 members, basically half the town. People posted about lost dogs, garage sales, recommendations for plumbers, complaints about teenagers speeding down residential streets. Normal stuff. I introduced myself with a simple post. Hi everyone, just moved here and working at Riverside Vet Clinic. Happy to be part of this community. Got maybe 40 likes, a dozen welcome comments, felt good about it. For the first few weeks I just scrolled through, learning who the town characters were. There was Betty, who commented on everything, Tom, who always had something to sell, and Nancy, who posted sunset photos every single evening without fail. I started recognizing these names, feeling like I was getting to know the rhythm of the place, the personalities that made Millbrook what it was. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in early June. I'd posted a photo of a golden retriever puppy that had come into the clinic, One of those feel-good posts that usually gets tons of hearts and smiley faces. Within minutes, I had a private message from someone whose profile name was just J. Smith. Generic as hell. Profile picture was just a landscape photo of some mountains. The message said, "That's such a cute puppy, almost as cute as you looked this morning in your yellow sundress at the coffee shop." The one with the little daisies on it. My whole body went rigid. I'd worn that exact dress to Sunrise Cafe that morning, had been there for maybe 15 minutes grabbing a latte before work. The dress was new, I'd only worn it twice, and the daisies were tiny. You'd have to be pretty close to notice them. I checked the profile immediately. Created just a month ago. No friends visible, no posts, no photos except that generic mountain scene that looked like it came from a stock photo website. The cover photo was just black. Nothing else. I told myself maybe it was someone from the coffee shop who recognized me from my introduction post. Maybe they were just socially awkward. Didn't know how creepy that sounded. But then another message popped up while I was still staring at the profile. "You should try their blueberry muffins tomorrow. I think you'd like them. You seem like someone who appreciates the sweeter things." The way it was written, the assumption that I'd be there tomorrow, the weird personal observation at the end, everything about it made my chest tight. I didn't respond, just took screenshots and closed Facebook, tried to focus on work, tried to convince myself I was overreacting. The messages kept coming over the next 3 days, always when I was actually doing something they referenced. "Hope that salad from Garden Bistro was good. You looked tired. Maybe add more protein," came through while I was literally still eating lunch at the restaurant. "Your neighbor's dog seems to really like you. The way you pet him every evening around 6:15 is sweet." Arrived at 6:20 p.m., 5 minutes after I'd gone inside from talking to Mrs. Garrett and her beagle. "That gray Toyota needs a new tire, the back left one. You should get that checked before something happens." Showed up right after I parked at home. Each message had this casual, concerned tone, like we were friends, like this was normal. But embedded in every word was the fact that this person was watching me constantly, cataloging my routines, my choices, my interactions with other people. I started changing everything. Drove different routes to work, even though Millbrook only had so many streets. Stopped going to Sunrise Cafe. Started making coffee at home with the blinds drawn. Parked my car in the garage instead of the driveway, even though the garage door stuck and took forever to open. But the messages adapted. "Missing your usual spots? Don't let fear change who you are." Then, "The blue curtains in your bedroom look nice, but you should consider blackout shades. Better for sleep." That one made me vomit. My bedroom faced the backyard, surrounded by a 6-foot fence and thick bushes. To see my curtains, someone would have to be in my yard, close to the house, deliberately looking. I called the police that night, spoke to Officer Daniels, who took notes but seemed skeptical. "Facebook drama," he called it. Said unless there were explicit threats, there wasn't much they could do. Told me to block the profile and install motion lights. I blocked J. Smith immediately after hanging up with the police. For about 6 hours, I actually felt like I could breathe again. Then around midnight, a new friend request, John S. Miller. Different profile, same mountain photo, created that very day. The first message came through before I could even process what was happening. "Blocking me won't help. I'm trying to look out for you. That locksmith you Googled earlier has terrible reviews. Use Henderson's instead. They're more trustworthy." My laptop was closed on my kitchen table. I had searched for locksmiths on my phone, in my bedroom with the door locked. The detail about which company I'd looked at made my knees buckle. This person had to be in my devices somehow, watching my searches, maybe reading my emails, seeing everything I thought was private. The next morning, a Saturday, I went to stay with my coworker Megan, packed a bag, told her everything, showed her the messages. She lived 40 minutes away in Riverside, said I could stay as long as I needed. But even there, even in a different town, the messages found me. This time from Jane Solomon. "Megan seems nice. Good choice staying with her. The guest room you're in gets cold at night. There are extra blankets in the hall closet. I hadn't posted anything about where I was, hadn't told anyone except Megan. We checked her windows, her yard, looked for cameras, found nothing. The message had come through 20 minutes after I'd put my bag in the guest room. They knew which room I was in, knew the layout of Megan's house, knew about blankets in a closet I hadn't even opened. That's when I realized this wasn't just someone from town who'd gotten obsessed. This person, whoever they were, had been planning this, studying me, probably long before that first message. Megan called her brother Kevin, who worked in IT security. He came over that afternoon with equipment I didn't even know existed. RF detectors, programs to scan our phones, some device that could detect hidden cameras. While he worked, another message came through, this time from Jack Stevens. Having Kevin check for bugs? Smart. But I'm not that crude. You left your Facebook logged in at the library computer 2 months ago, Station 3. Always log out completely. My brain scrambled trying to remember. I had used the library computers back in April to print tax forms when my printer broke. Station 3 sounded right. It was near the back, quieter. But I always logged out of everything. I was careful about that. Or at least I thought I was. Kevin's scan found something else though. A tracking app buried deep in my phone, disguised as a system update. He said it could monitor everything. Location, messages, browsing history, even activate the microphone and camera remotely. The revelation that someone had been living in my phone, watching through my own camera, listening to my conversations, made me physically ill. Kevin removed the app, did a complete factory reset, checked Megan's devices too, just to be safe. We debated calling the FBI, but Kevin said without proof of who installed it or when, it would be hard to investigate. That evening, exhausted and paranoid, I made a decision. I posted in the Millbrook Community Board, the public group where this all started. Someone in this group has been stalking me using fake profiles. They've been sending messages about my daily activities. They know where I am at all times. They put tracking software on my phone. I know you're reading this, what do you want? Within 10 minutes, my phone rang. Unknown number. Against Megan's protests, I answered. The voice was digitally distorted, robotic almost. I want you to understand you're never alone. Check your work email. The line went dead. My work email had one new message, no sender address, just a string of numbers. The subject line was my home address. Inside were dozens of photos. Me at the grocery store from 2 weeks ago. Me jogging in the park last month. Me through my kitchen window making dinner. Me asleep in my bed, taken from inside my room. That last set made me scream. The dates went back 6 months, 3 months before I'd even joined the Facebook group. In some photos, I could see other people in the background living their lives, unaware someone was documenting mine. The last photo was from that morning. Me getting into Megan's car in my driveway, time-stamped 8:47 a.m. Below all the photos, one line of text. You were never meant to leave Millbrook. Come home by tomorrow night alone, or these become public. Your choice. Megan called the police immediately, while Kevin started downloading and documenting everything before it could disappear. This time, the police took it seriously. The photos from inside my house were breaking and entering, criminal surveillance, stalking across state lines since I was now in Riverside. Detective Warner from the state police took over the case, said they'd seen similar patterns before. Someone who starts with digital stalking, escalates to physical surveillance, uses psychological manipulation to control victims. They put together a plan. I would return to Millbrook, but with undercover officers stationed around my house, my phone now being monitored by their tech team, recording everything. The hardest part was acting normal, going back to my routine while knowing someone was out there, watching, believing they had won. That Sunday night I drove back alone as instructed, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed. Good girl, now we can be close again. The police were recording everything, triangulating the signals, closing in. I need to tell someone about what happened to me last year, because keeping it inside is eating me alive. I was 42, had a small but successful auto repair shop in our little farming town in Nebraska, population barely 1,800. Life was simple but good. I'd inherited the shop from my dad, knew everyone in town by their first name, fixed their trucks and tractors, went to the same church every Sunday. My wife Carol and I had just finished paying off our mortgage, had some money saved up, and our daughter was about to start her senior year of high school. Everything I'd worked 20 years for was finally coming together, and I thought I was being smart about protecting it. The person who destroyed my life wasn't some stranger from the city or anonymous scammer calling from overseas. It was Harold Brennan, who lived 3 houses down from me for 15 years. Harold wasn't just my neighbor. He'd been at my wedding, helped me rebuild my garage after the tornado in 2018, sat with me in the hospital when Carol had her appendix removed. His son played baseball with my nephew. His wife brought us casseroles when my mother passed, and every 4th of July we'd share beers and watch fireworks from his backyard. That February morning when he approached me at the diner about his new business venture, I had absolutely no reason to doubt him. He'd just sold his successful trucking company and said he wanted to invest the profits back into our community. Harold's idea seemed brilliant in its simplicity. He wanted to create a farm equipment leasing company that would help local farmers who couldn't afford the massive upfront costs of new machinery. Instead of taking out crushing loans for $500,000 combines, farmers could lease equipment during harvest season and return it afterward. Harold showed me spreadsheets, contracts with equipment manufacturers, letters of intent from 3 large farms in neighboring counties. He had an office space picked out in the old bank building downtown, business cards printed, even a website that looked professional. When he pulled out a folder with photocopies of checks from other investors, people I knew and respected, showing they'd already put in $50,000, $75,000, even $100,000, I felt that familiar pang of being left behind, of missing an opportunity that everyone else had already seen. The meeting that changed everything happened at Harold's kitchen table on a Saturday morning. His wife made her famous cinnamon rolls. His golden retriever kept nudging my hand for scratches, and sunlight streamed through the windows onto the business plan he'd laid out. He showed me projected returns of 35% in the first year alone, based on contracts he claimed were already signed. The local bank president, George Hutchinson, had supposedly invested $150,000 of his own money. Harold showed me the deposit slip. My friend Carl from the hardware store was in for $80,000. The Anderson family, who owned the grain elevator, had put in $200,000. Harold said they were keeping it quiet until the business was fully operational, didn't want to create jealousy in town or have people asking for special deals. But he was offering me a chance to get in early because of our friendship, because he knew I had money saved and deserved to see it grow. I went home and talked to Carol about it for 3 days straight. She was hesitant at first. That money was for our daughter's college and our retirement. But I kept thinking about George Hutchinson investing $150,000. George was the smartest businessman I knew, had turned that small bank into a regional powerhouse. If he thought it was solid, who was I to question it? I called Harold and told him I could do $30,000. He laughed warmly, said that was fine, but the minimum investment was $50,000. He'd already made an exception letting me in at all since other investors had put in much more. He showed me emails from 2 farmers in Iowa asking to invest $250,000 each, but he was keeping it local, keeping it family. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept calculating what 35% of $50,000 would mean for us. By morning, I'd convinced myself that playing it safe was actually the risky choice. The day I withdrew our entire savings of $75,000, the young teller at the bank asked me twice if I was sure. I remember feeling superior to her, like she couldn't understand the kind of opportunity I was seizing. I even withdrew an additional $25,000 from our home equity line of credit, bringing my total investment to an even $100,000. Harold had said the more I put in, the better my returns, and I wanted to secure my family's future. When I handed him that cashier's check in his living room, he actually got emotional. He stood up, shook my hand with both of his, and said I wouldn't regret this. His wife hugged me, said we were all going to change this town for the better. Harold gave me a folder with my investment documents, certificates that looked more official than my own business papers, complete with gold seals and watermarks. I drove home feeling like I'd just won the lottery, but was smart enough not to tell anyone yet. For 3 months, everything seemed perfect. Harold sent weekly email updates about equipment purchases, photos of combines and tractors with our company logo on them, even a picture of him shaking hands with a representative from Case IH. He'd wave at me from his driveway, give me thumbs up, tell me the first dividend checks would come in May. I started looking at new trucks online, thinking about surprising Carol with a vacation to Hawaii, mentally spending money I didn't have yet. Then one morning in early May, I noticed Harold's house was dark. His truck wasn't in the driveway, newspapers were piling up. I figured they'd gone to visit their son in Colorado, but when a week passed with no word, I started calling. His phone went straight to voicemail. The office number for the equipment company was disconnected. The website showed an error message. The truth came out like a dam bursting. I drove to George Hutchinson's office at the bank, demanding to know what was happening with our investment. George looked at me like I'd grown a second head. He'd never invested a penny with Harold, never even heard of the equipment company. Those deposit slips Harold showed me? Forgeries. Carl from the hardware store? Same story. He'd never invested anything. The Andersons were just as confused when I called them. One by one, I discovered that every single investor Harold had told me about was a lie. But there were real victims. 17 of us in total. The retired teacher who'd invested her husband's life insurance payout. The young couple who'd sold their starter home to invest the proceeds. The elderly widow who'd given Harold $300,000, nearly everything she had. We'd all been told we were joining other respected community members, all been shown the same fake documents, all been promised the same impossible returns. The FBI found Harold and his wife living in a rental house in Florida, using different names. They'd taken nearly $2 million from our small town. $2 million from people who trusted them, who'd sat next to them at church, whose kids played together, who'd shared countless meals and memories. During the investigation, we learned Harold's trucking company had been failing for years. He'd never sold it successfully like he claimed. His wife knew everything, helped him create the fake documents, was there smiling when victims handed over their life savings. The trial was held in federal court in Lincoln, and watching Harold in an orange jumpsuit, refusing to make eye contact with any of us, made me physically sick. He got 12 years. His wife got 7. Some people said that wasn't enough, but no amount of prison time would bring back what we'd lost. The financial destruction was immediate and brutal. I had to tell Carol that our savings were gone, that we now owed $25,000 on a home equity loan for money that had vanished, that our daughter would need student loans for college. The look on her face will haunt me forever, not anger, just profound disappointment and fear. I took every repair job I could find, worked 70-hour weeks, but it wasn't enough. We had to sell Carol's car, cash out my small retirement account with massive penalties, borrow money from her parents, which destroyed my pride. Our daughter, straight-A student who'd gotten into her dream school, enrolled in community college instead. She never complained, never blamed me, which somehow made it worse. The marriage survived, but it changed. Carol stopped trusting my judgment, started handling all our finances, would get quiet whenever money came up. We became roommates raising a child together, the easy warmth between us replaced by careful politeness. But worse than losing the money was losing my place in the community. Small towns have long memories, and I became the guy who'd been stupid enough to fall for Harold's scheme. People who'd known me my whole life would stop talking when I walked into the diner. Customers started taking their vehicles to the new shop across town, not wanting to trust someone with such poor judgment. At church, conversations died when I approached, everyone suddenly fascinated by their coffee cups or their phones. Some people were genuinely sympathetic, but their pity was almost worse than the judgment. The other victims and I formed an unwanted fraternity. We'd nod at each other at the grocery store, share quick updates about the legal proceedings, but we were reminders to each other of the worst day of our lives. The retired teacher moved to live with her daughter in Minnesota. The young couple divorced. The elderly widow had to sell her family farm that had been in her family for 4 generations. I still live in the same town, still run my shop, though business never fully recovered. Carol and I are working through it, going to counseling, slowly rebuilding something different than what we had before. Our daughter graduated from community college, got a job, seems to be doing okay despite everything. The FBI recovered about $400,000 of the stolen money, which meant each victim got back roughly 20 cents on the dollar. I got a check for $20,000, which didn't even cover the home equity loan. Harold will be out of prison in 8 years with good behavior. Sometimes I drive past his old house, now owned by a young family from Des Moines, who got it cheap at the foreclosure auction. They painted it yellow, put up a swing set, have no idea about the destruction that was planned at that kitchen table. The new owners wave at me sometimes, friendly and oblivious, and I wave back, carrying my anger and shame quietly, privately, the way you do in a small town where everyone knows your failure but pretends they don't. The night everything changed was a Friday in late August 2017. I was 28, teaching 3rd grade at the elementary school in our small Montana town, population just under 4,000. My life was simple but fulfilling. I'd been living alone in a cozy rental house near the town center for about 3 years, spending weekdays with my students and weekends hiking the trails that wound through the mountains surrounding our valley. That particular evening, I'd met my friend Lisa at Murphy's Diner for our monthly catch-up over pie and coffee, something we'd been doing since high school. The diner sat on Main Street, only about a 15-minute walk from my place, and I always enjoyed the stroll home, especially on warm summer nights when the air smelled like pine and the crickets created a peaceful soundtrack. Around 9:30 p.m. I hugged Lisa goodbye in the parking lot and started my walk home along Hillcrest Road. The street was poorly lit, just a few street lamps every couple hundred feet, but I'd walked this route countless times and knew every crack in the sidewalk, every house I'd pass. The Johnsons' golden retriever would usually bark from behind their fence. Mrs. Foster's wind chimes would tinkle in her front yard, and old Mr. Ramirez would often be sitting on his porch, raising a hand in greeting. That night, though, most houses were already dark, their occupants probably watching TV or getting ready for bed. I remember feeling completely at peace, thinking about the lesson plans I needed to finish that weekend, humming some tune I'd heard on the radio earlier. The air was still warm but carried that hint of approaching fall, and I was wearing my favorite sundress, the yellow one with tiny flowers that my mom had given me for my birthday. I was about halfway home, passing the stretch where Hillcrest curves slightly near the old oak tree everyone calls the wishing tree, because kids have been tying ribbons to it for decades. The sidewalk ended there, so I had to walk on the shoulder of the road, but there was usually so little traffic at that hour that it never bothered me. I could hear music coming from somewhere. Later I'd learn it was from Rusty's Tavern, about a quarter-mile back, where they were having their weekly karaoke night. The sound of someone badly singing an old country song drifted through the air, mixing with the distant laughter and the clink of bottles being tossed into a dumpster. I actually smiled at how terrible the singing was, thinking I should tell Lisa about it tomorrow. The shoulder was gravel, and my sandals made soft crunching sounds with each step. I stayed close to the drainage ditch on my right, where wildflowers grew in messy clusters, and occasionally I'd spot a rabbit darting into the brush. That's when I heard the engine, not the steady hum of a car maintaining speed, but this aggressive, uneven roaring that kept surging and dropping, like someone was randomly stomping on the gas pedal. I turned my head to look back, and saw headlights weaving across both lanes about 200 yards away. moving way too fast for this narrow road. The car, a dark pickup truck, I could tell from the height of the lights, kept drifting from one side to the other, tires squealing every time it corrected too hard. My first thought wasn't even about my own safety. I actually worried the driver might hit the wishing tree, which sounds ridiculous now. But then I realized the truck was accelerating, really gunning it on this straight stretch, and it was veering toward my side of the road. The headlights swung wide to the left, then overcorrected sharply to the right, heading straight for the shoulder where I was walking. Everything happened in maybe 3 seconds, but my brain recorded it in this strange, stretched-out way. I tried to jump toward the ditch, but my sandal caught on a larger piece of gravel and I stumbled. The truck was so close I could see the bugs splattered on the grill, could smell the hot engine and burnt rubber. The driver, I glimpsed his face for just an instant through the windshield, had this slack, unfocused expression, his mouth hanging open, one hand loosely on the wheel while the other held what looked like a beer bottle. His eyes weren't even looking at the road. They were glazed, staring at nothing. The impact came from behind and to my left, the truck's front bumper catching me at hip level and launching me forward like I weighed nothing. I remember the sensation of flying, my dress billowing up, one sandal flying off, and thinking absurdly that I needed to cover myself, that people might see my underwear. Then I hit the pavement hard, my right shoulder taking the initial impact before I rolled and skidded across the asphalt. The pain didn't register immediately. There was just this overwhelming wrongness, like my body had become a jumbled puzzle, with pieces forced into the wrong spots. I could taste copper in my mouth and feel wetness spreading across the right side of my face. The truck hadn't stopped. I heard it screech around the next curve, metal scraping against something, probably the guardrail, before the engine noise faded into the distance. I tried to move, to get up, but my right leg wouldn't respond at all. And when I looked down, I saw it was bent at an angle that made no anatomical sense, my foot facing completely backward. My right arm was trapped underneath me, and when I tried to pull it free, white-hot agony shot through my shoulder and chest. I could hear myself making these awful whimpering sounds, like a wounded animal, but I couldn't stop. The yellow sundress my mom had given me was torn and soaking up blood from a dozen different places, the tiny flowers disappearing under spreading red stains. I lay there on the warm asphalt, feeling it burning against my exposed skin, trying to call for help but only managing these raspy whispers. My phone had been in my purse, which was now scattered somewhere in the darkness. I could see my wallet about 10 feet away, my driver's license face up and reflecting the moonlight. Every breath felt like someone was stabbing me with hot knives, and I realized some of my ribs were probably broken. The worst part was the loneliness of it all. This horrible thing had just happened to me, and I was completely alone on this dark road, unable to even cry properly because it hurt too much to take deep breaths. I kept thinking about my students, about how Monday was supposed to be show and tell, and Timmy was bringing his new hamster. About how Lisa was probably home by now, maybe getting ready for bed, not knowing her best friend was bleeding out on Hillcrest Road. About my parents in Ohio, who I'd talked to just that morning, my mom reminding me to eat more vegetables. Such normal thoughts while my body was so catastrophically broken. It was Mrs. Foster who found me, thank God. She'd let her cat out and heard what she later described as ungodly moaning coming from the road. I saw her porch light flip on first, then heard her screen door slam, her voice calling out asking if someone was there. When her flashlight beam found me, she screamed, really screamed, this piercing sound that probably woke up half the neighborhood. But she pulled herself together fast, ran back inside to call 911, then came back with blankets and towels, pressing them against the worst of the bleeding while talking to me in this shaky but determined voice. "Stay with me, honey. Stay awake. Help's coming. You're going to be okay." She kept repeating it like a mantra, though we both knew from looking at my mangled leg that okay was relative. She held my left hand, the only part of me that seemed uninjured, and I squeezed it so hard I probably left bruises. Other neighbors started appearing, drawn by the commotion. their faces swimming in and out of my vision like pale balloons. Someone was crying. Someone else was yelling about finding the bastard who did this. The ambulance arrived in what felt like hours, but was probably only about 12 minutes. The EMTs were efficient, professional, their hands moving quickly to stabilize my neck, start an IV, carefully straighten my leg. That part made me scream so loud I passed out for a few seconds. When I came to, I was already on the stretcher, being loaded into the ambulance. One of the EMTs, a young guy with a beard, kept talking to me about random things. The weather, the high school football team's chances this season, anything to keep me conscious. I found out later that they were genuinely worried I wouldn't make it to the hospital, that I'd lost so much blood they radioed ahead for the trauma team to be ready. The ride was a blur of sirens, radio chatter, and this crushing pressure on my chest that made every breath a monumental effort. I remember asking the bearded EMT if I was going to die, and he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Not on my watch." Something about his certainty, even if it might have been false confidence, gave me what I needed to keep fighting. The next few days exist in fragments. Surgery, multiple surgeries actually. My leg required pins, plates, and screws to put the shattered bones back together. 3 broken ribs, one of which had punctured my lung. A torn rotator cuff in my shoulder. Severe road rash covering 30% of my body. A concussion that left me confused and nauseated for days. Internal bruising so extensive that just moving made me want to vomit. The doctor, a stern woman named Dr. Patel, told me bluntly that I was lucky to be alive, that if the impact had been 6 inches higher, it would have crushed my organs. Lucky. That word felt like a sick joke when I couldn't even feed myself, when nurses had to help me with everything, when the pain medication made me hallucinate that the drunk driver was standing in the corner of my hospital room, still holding that beer bottle, still with that slack, empty expression. My parents flew in from Ohio, and seeing my mother cry when she first saw me was almost worse than the physical pain. My father, who never showed emotion, had to leave the room several times, and I could hear him punching the wall in the hallway. They caught him, of course. Bradley Nowak, 43 years old, owned a construction company in town. He'd driven home, parked his truck in his garage, and gone to bed like nothing had happened. The police found him the next morning after someone reported seeing his damaged truck with blood on the bumper. His blood alcohol was still above the legal limit 8 hours after he'd hit me. He claimed he thought he'd hit a deer, didn't realize it was a person. The detective who interviewed me in the hospital told me Nowak had 2 prior DUIs, had just gotten his license back 6 months earlier. When they showed him my photo, apparently he broke down crying, saying he knew my family, that his daughter had been in my class 2 years ago. That detail haunted me. I remembered his daughter, Chloe, a sweet girl who loved to draw butterflies. How do you reconcile that the man who read to his daughter at night, who showed up to parent-teacher conferences, was the same person who got behind the wheel drunk and destroyed my life? The detective said Nowak wanted to apologize to me in person, but I couldn't do it. I still can't. Some things can't be fixed with sorry. The recovery was its own kind of hell. 3 months in the hospital and rehabilitation center, learning to walk again with a leg that would never be the same. Physical therapy sessions that left me sobbing from pain and frustration. The medical bills that exceeded my teacher's insurance coverage, forcing me to move back in with my parents in Ohio because I couldn't afford my rent anymore and couldn't navigate my house's stairs anyway. The school had to hire a long-term substitute, and by January, they'd made the position permanent. I understood. They couldn't wait indefinitely, but it still felt like another loss. My life in that small Montana town, the one I'd built so carefully over years, was gone. The independence I'd cherished, the simple pleasure of walking wherever I wanted, the ability to trust that the world was generally safe, all of it had been ripped away in 3 seconds by a man who chose to drink and drive. Even now, 6 years later, I walk with a pronounced limp, can't run at all, and every time I hear tires squeal or an engine rev, my whole body tenses up, ready for impact. The woman who loved evening walks, who felt at home on those small town streets. She died on Hillcrest Road that night. I survived, but I'm not the same person anymore. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday in late September 2022. I was 26, living in a cramped apartment above the hardware store where I worked, in our little town of Millfield, Arkansas. Population barely scraping 4,000, the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did. My younger brother Eddie was 23, still lived with our mom, worked nights stocking shelves at the supermart on Highway 22. The police said they found him behind Gus's Quick Stop, the convenience store 3 blocks from the supermart. Single gunshot wound to the chest. They kept using this phrase that made me want to punch walls. Wrong place, wrong time. Like Eddie just wandered behind some random store at 1 in the morning for no reason. Like he was some kind of idiot who got himself killed by accident. Eddie wasn't stupid. He was careful, almost paranoid sometimes. He'd text me when he got to work, text me when he left. That night, his last message came at 12:47 a.m. Heading home, stopping for smokes at Gus's. 15 minutes later, he was dead. The detective, this older guy named Briggs with coffee stains on his tie, told me they had no witnesses, no cameras that caught anything useful. He said Eddie's wallet was still in his pocket, $43 cash inside. His phone was right there next to him, screen cracked but working. Nothing stolen. Briggs kept pushing this robbery gone wrong theory that made zero sense. When I pressed him about why a robber would shoot someone and take nothing, he just shrugged, said maybe Eddie fought back, scared them off. But here's what really got me. There were no defensive wounds on Eddie's hands, no signs of a struggle. Someone just executed my brother and walked away. I couldn't let it go. Started hanging around Gus's Quick Stop, talking to anyone who'd listen. Gus himself, this Lebanese guy who'd owned the place for 15 years, got real nervous when I asked questions. Kept wiping his hands on his apron, looking at the door like he expected someone to walk in. He said he was home that night, didn't know anything. But his employee, this kid named Travis who worked mornings, let slip that Gus had been there until 2 a.m. doing inventory. Strange thing to do inventory the same night my brother died out back. I started going there every day, buying coffee, just watching. Noticed certain people would go straight to the back office without buying anything. They'd stay maybe 5 minutes, come out empty-handed. Gus would always walk them out, patting their shoulders like old friends. The breakthrough came from Eddie's phone. The police gave it back to our mom after their investigation, and I went through everything. His photos, his texts, his notes app where he kept random thoughts. Found something from 2 weeks before he died. Saw Brandon Hewitt behind Gus's again. 3rd time this week, always after midnight, always carrying duffel bags into that shed. Brandon Hewitt was someone everybody in Millfield knew to avoid. 30-something, lived in a big house on the north side that he definitely couldn't afford on paper. Drove a black Escalade with tinted windows. His official job was consultant, whatever that meant. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. Even the cops seemed to give him space, and apparently my brother had been watching him. I started doing what Eddie had done, watching. Parked my truck down the street from Gus's after midnight, different spots each time. Within a week, I saw the pattern. Every Monday and Friday around 1 a.m., Brandon's Escalade would pull up. He'd go behind the store, toward this old metal shed that supposedly held supplies. 10 minutes later, different cars would arrive. Regular people, some I recognized, like Mrs. Holloway's son Paul, the one who dropped out of college, or Jennifer Martinez who worked at the bank. They'd go back there too, come out quick, drive away. The shed had a padlock that looked new, heavy-duty, not the rusty thing you'd expect on a storage shed. I took pictures with my phone, dozens of them, license plates, faces, times. Started a notebook like Eddie had, documenting everything. Then I made a mistake. Got too bold, too angry. One Friday night after Brandon left, I walked right up to that shed. The padlock was still warm, like someone had been holding it. There was this chemical smell coming from under the door, sharp and wrong. Made my eyes water. I was taking pictures of the lock when I heard footsteps on gravel. Turned around and there was Gus, standing 10 feet away with a baseball bat. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking behind me. Brandon's Escalade was back, parked sideways, blocking the alley exit. Brandon got out slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. He was wearing latex gloves. That detail still haunts me. The way those gloves caught the light from the street lamp. "You're Eddie's brother," Brandon said. Not a question. His voice was calm, almost friendly, which made it worse. Shame about what happened. Real tragedy. He stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne, something expensive and suffocating. "Your mom's having a hard time, I heard. Medical bills from her diabetes treatment. Tough situation." The threat was so casual, so clear. He knew about my mom's condition, knew where she lived, knew her schedule. Smart family, though. Eddie was smart, until he wasn't. Gus hadn't moved, still holding that bat, sweating through his shirt despite the cool night. Brandon pulled out his phone, showed me a photo. It was me, at my apartment window, taken from the street. Timestamp from 3 hours ago. We notice things in this town. People watching, people asking questions, people who don't know when to grieve quietly. I ran. Not proud of it, but I ran hard, vaulted over a chain-link fence, cut through backyards I'd known since childhood. Could hear Brandon laughing behind me, not even bothering to chase. Got to my truck and drove straight to the police station. Detective Briggs was there, working late. I showed him everything, the photos, the notes, Eddie's phone. He looked through it all, real careful, then closed my notebook and slid it back. "You need to stop this," he said quietly, "for your mother's sake." That's when I understood. Briggs knew. They all knew. The whole town knew, and nobody would do anything because Brandon Hewitt owned too many people, had too much dirt, controlled too much of the money flowing through our dying little town. But I couldn't stop. Eddie deserved better than being another buried secret in Millfield. I drove to the state police barracks 40 miles away, walked in at 3 a.m. with everything I had. The trooper on duty, a woman named Officer Reeves, actually listened, really listened, called her supervisor, then another. By sunrise, I was in a room with 3 state investigators going through every detail. They already had a file on Brandon Hewitt, turned out. Been building a case for 2 years but couldn't get anyone local to talk. Eddie's notes, my photos, they were the missing pieces. They needed someone willing to testify, someone with nothing left to lose. That was me. They put me and my mom in protective custody that same day, moved us to a motel 2 towns over while they worked. The raids happened on a Sunday morning. 17 arrests, including Brandon, Gus, and 2 Millfield police officers. They found the lab in a basement beneath the shed. Been cooking meth for 3 years, distributing across 4 counties. The local news called it the biggest drug bust in state history. But what broke me was what they found in Brandon's house. A handgun, recently fired, ballistics matched to the bullet that killed Eddie, and a recording on his security system from that night. Him talking to someone on the phone saying, "The kid knows," saw him taking pictures of the shed. Eddie died because he tried to do the right thing, because he collected evidence of what everyone else was too scared to see. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 days straight, voice steady even when Brandon stared at me from the defense table. His lawyer tried to paint Eddie as involved, said he was behind that store to buy drugs. But the prosecution had Eddie's work schedule, his text to me, the timeline that proved he was just passing through. They had Brandon's voice on that recording, clear as day. The jury took 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: murder, drug manufacturing, distribution, racketeering, life without parole. Gus got 25 years. The cops got 15 each. When they read the verdict, Brandon finally looked scared. All that power he had, all those people he owned, meant nothing in that courtroom. My mom cried for the first time since Eddie's funeral. Not sad tears, relieved ones. We never went back to Millfield. Couldn't. Too many people there were customers, or scared, or both. Some blamed me for destroying the town's economy, since Brandon's money had been keeping businesses afloat. Moved 3 states away, started over. Mom's closer to better doctors now, and I work construction. Good, honest work where nobody asks about your past. Still have nightmares sometimes. Brandon's latex gloves, Eddie's last text, that chemical smell from the shed. But Eddie got justice. That matters. His notebook sits in my desk drawer, his careful handwriting documenting what he saw, what got him killed, what ultimately brought down the biggest secret in our town. He was braver than any of us knew, braver than I'll ever be. And every morning when I wake up somewhere safe, somewhere Brandon Hewitt can't reach, I think about how Eddie saved this town, even if it cost him everything. Last April changed everything for my family. I was just a regular dad in Clearwater, Kansas, worked at the local hardware store, coached Little League on weekends, had barbecues with the neighbors. My son Jason had just turned 17, was getting ready for his senior year, talking about college applications and which schools had good engineering programs. He spent most of his time either at basketball practice or working his part-time job at the grocery store downtown. That morning started like any other. I made coffee, Jason grabbed a protein bar on his way out. My wife Laura kissed us both goodbye before heading to the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade. By sunset, our entire world had collapsed, and I found myself doing something I never imagined, investigating a murder to save my son. The call came around noon while I was helping a customer pick out paint colors. Sheriff Dawson's voice was strange, formal in a way that immediately made my chest tighten. He asked me to come down to the station, said Jason was there, said there had been an incident. The 15-minute drive felt like hours, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Had he been in an accident? Was he hurt? Had something happened at work? When I walked into that station and saw my son sitting in an interrogation room, his face pale and confused, while deputies stood guard outside, reality hit me like a physical blow. They were charging him with the murder of Ashley Brenner, a 19-year-old who worked at the coffee shop 3 blocks from Jason's grocery store. She'd been found that morning in the alley behind her apartment building, and somehow, impossibly, they thought my son had killed her. The evidence seemed damning at first glance. Security footage showed Jason walking past that alley around 10:30 p.m. the previous night, right around the time they estimated Ashley had died. His backpack had been found in a dumpster 2 blocks away, though Jason swore he'd lost it at basketball practice 3 days earlier. Most devastating was that Ashley's roommate claimed she'd heard Ashley on the phone that night, upset, saying Jason's name repeatedly. The sheriff kept emphasizing these points while I sat there in disbelief, watching my son's future crumble. But here's what didn't sit right with me from the very beginning. Jason had been home by 9:45 that night. I remembered clearly because we'd watched the end of the game together, argued about whether the refs made the right call on that last play. The timeline they were pushing meant he would have had to leave our house again, commit this terrible crime, dispose of evidence, and return home, all without Laura or me noticing. I spent that first night after they arrested him going through everything, unable to sleep, unable to eat, just poring over every detail I could remember. Laura cried until she had no tears left, then threw herself into calling lawyers, calling family, calling anyone who might help. But I kept thinking about what Jason told me during those 5 minutes they'd given us together. He said Ashley had been scared of someone lately, that she'd mentioned it to her co-worker Madison when they'd all grabbed lunch together the week before. He said Ashley kept checking her phone, kept looking toward the door of the restaurant, kept apologizing for being distracted. Police dismissed this when I brought it up, said kids make up stories when they're desperate, said the evidence spoke for itself. Sheriff Dawson, who'd known our family for 15 years, who'd been at Jason's baptism, looked me in the eye and said sometimes we don't really know our children. That's when I realized, if I wanted to save my son, I'd have to find the truth myself. The next morning, while Laura met with lawyers, I started at the coffee shop where Ashley had worked. Madison was there, eyes red from crying, hands trembling as she made lattes. When I approached her, she initially backed away, probably recognizing me as the father of the accused killer. But when I mentioned what Jason had said about Ashley being scared, her expression changed completely. She glanced around nervously, then whispered that Ashley had been receiving flowers at work, beautiful expensive arrangements with no card, no name, just showing up every Monday for the past month. Ashley had assumed they were from her ex-boyfriend at first, but when she thanked him, he had no idea what she was talking about. The last bouquet had arrived the Monday before she died, white roses mixed with baby's breath. Madison said Ashley had thrown them straight in the trash, her face ghost white, and spent the rest of her shift jumping every time the door chimed. I asked Madison who else knew about the flowers, and she mentioned that Mr. Aldridge, who owned the coffee shop, had commented on them several times, even joked that Ashley must have a secret admirer with deep pockets. Richard Aldridge, pillar of the community, Chamber of Commerce president, sponsor of half the youth sports teams in town, including Jason's basketball team. Everyone loved Mr. Aldridge, with his gentle smile and his generous donations and his perfect family Christmas cards. But Madison's next words made me stop breathing for a moment. She said Mr. Aldridge had offered to drive Ashley home the night she died, right around closing time. Ashley had declined, said she was meeting someone, though Madison didn't know who. The security footage the police had shown me only covered the front of the stores, not the back entrances or employee parking areas. I thanked Madison and left, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. That afternoon, I did something I'm not proud of. I went through Ashley's social media accounts. Her Instagram was public, full of coffee art and sunsets and pictures with friends. But when I checked who had been liking and commenting on her posts, one pattern emerged that made my pulse quicken. Richard Aldridge's personal account had liked every single photo she'd posted in the last 2 months, often within minutes of posting. His comments seemed innocent enough. Great latte art, or you're really mastering that new machine. But the frequency was unsettling. On a photo from 3 weeks ago where Ashley wore her uniform and smiled at the camera, he'd commented, "Brightening up the shop as always," at 11:47 p.m. Why was a 50-year-old married man scrolling through his young employees' photos near midnight? I screenshot everything, knowing the police would probably dismiss it as harmless. But to me it painted a different picture than the one they'd constructed around my son. The real breakthrough came when I visited Ashley's apartment building. The police tape was gone, but the maintenance man, Hector, was fixing a broken light in the parking lot. He remembered me from when I'd helped renovate the building's community center 2 years back. When I asked about that night, he mentioned something the police apparently hadn't followed up on. Mr. Aldridge's white Lexus had been parked in the visitor spot until almost midnight. Hector noticed because it was blocking the dumpster access, and he'd had to wait to take out the trash. He said he'd told the detective who'd questioned him, but they seemed focused only on whether he'd seen Jason. Hector also mentioned that about a week before Ashley died, he'd seen her crying in her car in the parking lot while Mr. Aldridge stood outside her driver's door, apparently talking to her through the barely cracked window. She'd driven off suddenly, leaving him standing there. Hector had thought it was about work schedules or something, but now, thinking back, he said Ashley had looked terrified, not just upset. I knew I needed more than circumstantial observations, so I took a risk and visited the flower shop downtown, the only one in town that carried the kind of expensive arrangements Madison had described. The owner, Mrs. Chen, knew me well. I'd built custom shelving for her store last winter. When I described the arrangements Ashley had been receiving, she immediately knew what I was talking about. Those specific bouquets, always white roses with baby's breath, had been special orders, paid in cash every Friday for pickup on Monday morning. The customer always came in just before closing, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. But here's what made her remember. He'd once dropped his wallet while pulling out cash, and she'd seen a country club membership card with Richard Aldridge's name on it. She hadn't thought much of it, assumed he was buying flowers for his wife or the coffee shop. But the orders had stopped the week Ashley died, Mrs. Chen had actually wondered about it because he'd been so consistent for over a month. Armed with this information, I went to Sheriff Dawson, laid out everything I'd discovered in the past 48 hours. He listened, his expression growing more uncomfortable with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then told me that Richard Aldridge had already provided an alibi. He'd been at a Chamber of Commerce dinner until 10 p.m. Multiple witnesses confirmed it. But I pressed him about the Lexus at Ashley's building until midnight, about the flowers, about the social media activity. Dawson said he'd look into it, but his tone suggested he thought I was a desperate father grasping at straws. That's when I played my last card. I told him about Jason's backpack, how it had been found in that dumpster. That same dumpster that Hector said had been blocked by Aldridge's Lexus. The same dumpster only someone familiar with the building would know about. I watched Dawson's face change as he processed this connection. Jason had never been to Ashley's apartment building before, had no reason to know about that specific dumpster. But Aldridge, who'd been there that night, who'd been pursuing Ashley, he would have known exactly where to plant evidence. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. Dawson reopened the investigation, this time focusing on Richard Aldridge. They pulled his phone records, which showed he'd been calling Ashley repeatedly from a second phone, a prepaid one he'd purchased 2 months earlier. They found footage from a gas station camera that showed his Lexus heading toward Ashley's apartment at 10:15 p.m., not driving home as he'd claimed. When they searched his home office, they found a journal where he'd written obsessively about Ashley, pages and pages describing her daily routines, what she wore, who she talked to. The final entry, dated the day before she died, was chilling. She refuses to see what we could have together. She leaves me no choice. They also found Jason's school ID card in Aldridge's desk drawer. He'd taken it when Jason left his backpack at practice, planted the bag at the scene, but kept the ID as some kind of twisted insurance. The forensics team, going back over the evidence with fresh eyes, found Aldridge's DNA under Ashley's fingernails, something they'd initially missed because they'd been so focused on proving Jason's guilt. Richard Aldridge was arrested on a Saturday morning, pulled from his beautiful home while his wife stood in the doorway in shock. The whole town watched as their golden boy, their generous benefactor, was revealed as a predator and killer. He'd strangled Ashley when she rejected him one final time, then coldly framed a 17-year-old kid to cover his tracks. Jason was released that same afternoon, walking out of that nightmare into the sun, into his mother's arms, into a future that had almost been stolen from him. The town that had been so quick to condemn my son now couldn't look us in the eye. Some apologized, some pretended nothing had happened, but the damage was done. We ended up moving 3 months later, starting fresh somewhere where Jason wasn't that kid who was accused of murder. He's in college now, studying engineering just like he'd planned, but he's different, quieter, more cautious, less trusting. As for me, I learned that sometimes the real monsters are the ones everyone trusts, the ones with perfect smiles and community service awards. And I learned that when the system fails, when everyone else gives up, a parent's desperate search for truth might be the only thing standing between their child and a lifetime in prison. It had been a quiet season for me back then. I was living with my wife and our 2 kids in a farmhouse just outside a small town, the kind of place where nights were still, and the loudest thing you'd hear was the wind pushing against the old barn doors. Life wasn't perfect, but it was steady. I'd wake early for work, we'd spend evenings together, and the house had always felt like a safe little bubble, separated from whatever chaos happened in town. That night I remember sitting at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed, going through some unpaid bills and sipping on coffee. I shouldn't have been drinking that late. The first thing that caught my attention was the crunch of gravel in the driveway. Our place sits back from the road, and no one ever pulls in that late unless they know us. I thought maybe a neighbor's truck had broken down, or a friend had stopped by unannounced. But when I peeked through the window, the vehicle that rolled up didn't look familiar. The headlights cut off immediately, plunging everything back into darkness. I just stood there in the kitchen, listening. My dog, Scout, who usually barked at the slightest sound, was dead quiet, crouched low with his ears pinned back. That silence unsettled me more than the car itself. Before I had time to process it, the front door rattled violently. It wasn't a knock. It was someone forcing it, the kind of sound that makes your chest tighten instantly. I yelled for my wife, and within seconds, she was by the hallway with our son and daughter half asleep, confused. The door burst inward before I could grab anything to defend us. Two men wearing masks pushed through like they knew exactly where they were going. They weren't yelling, but their movements were sharp and urgent, one of them pointing a crowbar toward me like it was a weapon. I remember how heavy the air felt, like the entire house was holding its breath. They ordered us into the living room without saying much else. My kids clung to their mother, whispering, their faces pale in the dim light of the lamp I'd left on. The men didn't look at us like people, just obstacles in their way. One of them scanned the room, his mask pulled tight, and his voice had this flat, mechanical tone, like he'd practiced stripping all emotion from it. I tried to keep eye contact low, to not provoke anything, but every second felt like it was stretching. I kept thinking, this is our home, our safe place, and they're tearing that apart in front of my children. One of the men kept glancing toward the hallway like he was expecting someone else to show up, which made me wonder if there were more of them outside. The second man rifled through drawers, pulling things out and tossing them on the floor without even looking. It wasn't random chaos. It felt like they were searching for something specific. The strangest part is they barely looked at valuables. My wife's purse was on the table, untouched. Instead, they focused on cabinets, locked boxes, even old storage bins we hadn't touched in years. Every scrape of a drawer or slam of a cupboard echoed like a gunshot in the stillness of that room. At some point, the taller man motioned at me with the crowbar and demanded I open the safe in the basement. The thing is, that safe was a rusted metal box my father had left me. Nothing inside but paperwork and old keepsakes. Still, I led him down, trying to steady my voice so my kids wouldn't hear panic in it. The basement light flickered as it warmed up, throwing uneven shadows across the cement walls. He shoved me forward, impatient, and I had this eerie sense that if he didn't like what he found, the night would take a turn I couldn't control. When I unlocked the box and showed him the contents, he cursed under his breath. He pulled out some yellowed documents and tossed them on the ground like they were worthless, though he had clearly been expecting something. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard behind the mask, the crowbar resting against his leg. Then he leaned closer, almost whispering, "Where is it?" That question haunts me more than anything else, because I had no idea what he meant. Before I could even respond, the other man shouted from upstairs, and he bolted up the steps, leaving me staring at a pile of papers that suddenly felt heavier than they ever had before. When I rejoined my family in the living room, both men were pacing near the front door, arguing in short bursts that didn't make sense to me. They seemed agitated now, less controlled, as if whatever they were searching for wasn't turning up. My daughter buried her face against her mother's arm, whispering questions she was too afraid to ask out loud. I stood there, helpless. The image of that flickering basement light burned into my head. Then, as suddenly as they had come in, the men rushed out. No warning, no explanation. The door hung open behind them, swinging in the cold night air. We didn't move for several minutes, just listening to the sound of tires spinning on the gravel until it disappeared completely. The silence that followed was almost worse than the invasion itself. The house felt stripped of its warmth, like every familiar corner had been violated. My wife clutched the kids, rocking them gently as if to convince herself they were safe. I closed the door, bolted it, and leaned against it longer than I should have, half expecting those men to come crashing back through. Every creak of the old wood floors and groan of the walls made us flinch. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a kitchen knife by my side until the first weak light of dawn crept through the curtains. When the sheriff's deputies came, they walked through the house, shining their flashlights into every corner like they could somehow erase the memories of the night before. They asked questions I couldn't answer. Did I recognize their voices? Did I notice tattoos, scars, anything identifiable? The truth was, the masks and the way they carried themselves left nothing personal behind. It was like they'd slipped in from nowhere and disappeared just as suddenly, leaving only the question of what they had been so desperate to find. The deputies eventually left with little more than a report and a promise to keep an eye out. For weeks we couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. At night, headlights passing on the distant road made us tense. My son started insisting on sleeping with the lights on, while my daughter asked me to check her closet before bed. My wife started leaving the TV on in the living room all night, saying the noise made the house feel less empty. As for me, I'd walk the property line with Scout, flashlight in hand, knowing full well I wouldn't find anyone but still unable to convince myself we were truly alone. The air itself felt different, heavier, sharper, like the house was holding onto the memory of that night. We eventually replaced the front door, added cameras, even bought a new lock for the basement safe. But none of it really mattered. The invasion had already done what it came to do. It stole the sense of safety we'd built in that farmhouse. Even now, years later, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, straining to hear if gravel is crunching outside or if it's just a dream replaying itself. I don't know what those men were after, and I doubt I ever will. What I do know is that our home hasn't felt the same since, and maybe it never will.